What is up, guys? Daniel Plotkin here, muscle scientist, and of course, muscle lover, hitting you with another video. And this one is a big one. How many sets should you be doing in the gym per muscle group to maximize gains? Let's dive right in. The first major analysis to try to answer this question was done by Schoenfeld and colleagues in 2017. This happens to be the lab where I did my master's. This analysis hinted that 10 plus sets per muscle group per week resulted in the most growth. The issue at the time was there weren't many studies actually looking at high set volumes, and literally just 2 studies in trained individuals, so we were a bit in the dark. Fortunately, 7 years later, we have a lot more data. I'm going to mainly focus the discussion on studies with direct measurements of muscle, such as ultrasound and MRI, because these can more reliably detect changes in specific muscles. I'm also going to refer to low volumes as less than 10 sets, moderate volumes as 10 to 20 sets, and high volumes as more than 20 sets per muscle group per week. Let's dive right in and start with trained individuals. On this front, we have 7 studies to look at. As I mentioned them, I'll display some details about each study, as well as the pre and post percent changes for each group. We have 3 studies which lean positive to high volumes: Brigado 2019, Schoenfeld 2019, and Ines 2023. 3 studies which were fairly neutral between moderate and high volumes: Ostrowski 1997, Aube 2022, and Amirthalingam 2017. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And one which favored moderate volumes over high volumes, which was Hieselgrave 2019. So right off the bat, it seems like moderate volumes, with some ability to play with high volumes, seems to make the most sense, since most of the evidence is neutral to positive for high volumes. Now, when you compare not within, but across studies, there may be some variables that are accounting for or interacting with volume to actually create the differences we're seeing. For example, maybe specific exercises that are more fatiguing are preventing high volumes from being effective. Like if I were to prescribe 20 sets of 5-rep max deadlifts 3 times a week, perhaps most would agree that's not the best idea. So let's check out exercises first. Take a look at the studies which favor high volumes. Seems like a decent mix of compounds and isolation exercises overall, and the same is true for the studies which are neutral or positive toward moderate volumes. There are definitely differences between studies with exercises used and muscles measured, but no common trend to explain differences in outcomes. Proximity to failure tells the same story. No obvious pattern. What about rest periods between sets? Well, here there looked to be a possible trend with Schoenfeld and Brigado using shorter rest periods. So you could make a weak case that above 20 sets were only necessary if rest periods less than 2 minutes were used. However, the Ines findings do slightly contradict this assertion. There will be a separate video looking at direct studies on the topic of rest periods, but I think looking at the overall literature as well as the volume literature, conclusions are not super obvious, but resting until you feel ready if trying to maximize growth from each individual set is likely a good idea, which we can unpack on a later date looking at more direct evidence comparing rest periods. What about other potential variables? Duration of study, amount of participants used, muscle group specific growth? Nothing really stands out when looking at these studies in trained individuals, except for one thing. There simply just aren't enough studies to draw strong conclusions when subdividing. Now, while I presented the studies and the direction of effect so you could get a good picture and feel for what the studies actually did, which I think is important, let's take a look at the formal statistical analysis done on the topic, which mathematically gives more weight to larger sample sizes and accounts for variability which you won't get just from seeing the percent changes from pre to post for each group. Basval 2022 is the most recent analysis on the topic, which of course won't include the Ines 2023 findings because it was conducted a year before. Overall, they found that the differences are not very meaningful when comparing moderate to high volumes, but if you are willing to experiment, there could be potential upside. So it looks like in trained individuals, moderate volumes makes a whole lot of sense, while potentially experimenting with higher volumes if you're trying to milk all the gains. Now what about untrained? Now I know what you're thinking. Daniel, you're an idiot. Untrained people can grow from anything, and what they do in the gym doesn't matter. Well, it's possible I'm an idiot, but while it's true that untrained people can grow from pretty much anything, it's simply unequivocally and unambiguously false that they grow the same from anything. Let's take a look at studies done in untrained participants. Radielli 2014 was a 6-month study in Brazilian Army cadets, which heavily favored higher volumes all the way up to 45 sets a week in the triceps. And Cassiano and Ronestad broadly favored moderate volumes. The rest of the evidence with direct measures in untrained individuals compared 2 to 3 sets per week and 6 to 9 sets per week and favored higher compared to lower volumes, which is why it's no surprise that meta-analytic evidence in 2017 found that more volume is better when comparing low volumes, mostly to volumes closer to moderate. Since there is only one study with very high volumes, I don't think we can say anything very confidently about very high volumes in untrained individuals. Some things worth noting about the one high volume study by Radielli and colleagues was it was a much longer study, which should make us more confident. It's hard to run an 8-week study. A 6-month study is a heroic task, so I definitely commend the authors on that. But sometimes weird things happen in research, and we find things that kind of don't make sense that we can't really explain. And these things could have simply happened by chance. For example, the lack of growth at the other volumes compared to the profound growth at the highest volume does give a bit of pause. I'm not saying we should just toss the evidence, just that it's one study with some strengths but some weaknesses. Either way, I think trained and untrained individuals can probably milk most of their gains from those moderate volumes, but if they have the time and the recovery capacity, they can play with those higher volumes and potentially get some more benefit. Okay, so we looked at the evidence, but before we get into the practical takeaways, I want to go over some principles and terminology that may help. For principles, we can say that there will be a point of diminishing returns for volume. And for any specific individual, we don't know exactly where that will be, but probably around 20 sets per muscle group per week on average. I also want to introduce some new terms called volume landmarks, which to my knowledge was formalized and popularized by one of my former professors, also a fellow YouTuber, Dr. Mike Israetel. It's fairly simple. The volume landmarks for training each muscle group are maintenance volume, the minimum volume required to maintain current muscle mass, minimum effective volume, the lowest volume at which some growth occurs, maximum adaptive volume, the volume where the most gains occur, and maximum recoverable volume, the threshold of training volume that an individual can recover from and keep up performance, but wouldn't receive more gains from. So basically, extra training for no greater muscle gain. I propose, very boldly, one more volume landmark and 2 indicators that can help us describe some more concepts. For another volume landmark, I like DRV, or diminishing returns volume. This would be between minimum effective volume and maximum adaptive volume, and would be the point where there's a lot less growth per set, or said differently, this is the point where more sets becomes much less efficient, but there are still some extra gains to be had. For the indicators I'd like to add, maximal growth for a given volume, MGV, this is where you theoretically have the most growth possible within the constraints of the volume chosen. So if you choose to do 10 sets of chest, this tells you that you're getting the most growth that you could have in your chest from those 10 sets. And the second indicator I want to add is maximal growth potential. This is the theoretical maximum growth you could have if you got everything right, training at maximum adaptive volume while also choosing the perfect combination of exercises and nailing everything outside the gym, allowing you to reach the maximum growth that you can achieve or your maximum growth potential. I like these additions because it at least gets you thinking about variables outside of volume. Which combination of exercises, intensities, and so on will actually get you the most growth possible or the most growth possible for a given volume. For example, you could even bring down maximum adaptive volume and still reach your theoretical maximal growth potential by making each set more efficient. Now, it's important to stress that these are theoretical. We don't know where these landmarks and indicators are at any given time, and they will change due to many factors, such as stress, typical training you're used to, exercises used, proximity to failure per set, frequency in which you train a muscle, and so on. but keeping this framework in mind can help make thinking and talking about the subject easier. For example, we can say the push-pull relationship between intensity and volume tells us that it's likely if you were absolutely blacking out every set and hyping yourself up like crazy, you may have a lower maximum recoverable volume, a lower maximum adaptive volume, and lower maximum growth potential compared to a higher volume program that you're not taking every set to absolute death. But these same sets could also lower your maintenance volume, minimum effective volume, if you're doing a small number of sets at this very high intensity. This describes why you probably won't get the most gains possible by going absolutely crazy each set, but if you're going to do a low amount of sets, taking sets to very high intensities probably makes a whole lot of sense. Recovery within and between sessions likely won't be an issue at lower set numbers. Here are some more examples that can help you cement these concepts around landmarks and indicators. We probably have a per session maximum adaptive volume, so increasing session number to at least 2 for a given muscle group increases our weekly maximum adaptive volume as well as our maximal growth potential. More sleep may increase maximum adaptive volume and maximal growth potential, but it may also keep maximum adaptive volume the same or even bring it down at the same time as increasing maximum growth potential. We don't know. The theoretical alignment of maximal adaptive volume and maximal growth potential for a muscle is time and context dependent. For example, an exercise may bother your joints so much for one reason or another, decreasing your maximum recoverable volume below maximum adaptive volume. So while the exercise served you for a given time, it may not continue to serve you. Isn't this fun stuff? We have our own weird little language. You can pause the video and think about these statements. It's all good if it doesn't make sense initially, but I think beyond being able to use fewer words, getting an understanding of these landmarks and indicators helps you think about thresholds, how variables can interact, diminishing returns, and lots of other useful concepts that can guide your training decisions. Now for the more practical stuff. In my and many other coaches' experience, most people land around 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week for what makes sense practically and keeps people feeling good and progressing in the gym, which also happens to align with the evidence on volume. And for most people who don't have all their ducks in a row outside the gym, I think this is where they should probably stay. If they try to push above that for very long, especially with less sleep, life stress, and all that not so fun stuff, there are a decent amount of people that won't be as motivated to train, will start feeling signs of under-recovery, or even have some obvious signs of overtraining symptoms like poor sleep and increased illness. It's just simply not worth pushing those very high volumes if all the other stuff isn't mostly in line, in my opinion. Does this mean that you need to have everything in line outside the gym in order to play with higher volumes? No, definitely not. You can still experiment. But if you don't have a strong inclination to experiment and things are going well, it may not be worth it. Okay, so there will be a video on all of these subtopics: intensity, frequency, exercise selection. But not to leave you hanging, I'll give you lots of practical takeaways to think about. Assuming all sets are close to failure, most people can probably pretty safely stay around 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week, with 6 to 10 sets per muscle group per session. They can even be at 3 to 12 sets per muscle group per session, depending mostly on volume, frequency, and exercise selection throughout the week. We do want to choose volumes where we can see performance gains, but beyond making sure we are trending upward, I don't think performance is that useful for knowing what's best for growth. If you feel well recovered from moderate volumes, pushing all muscles above 20 sets per week doesn't sound like the best idea, but a few muscles up for a specialization phase while bringing some other muscles down in volume doesn't seem like a bad bet from both a psychological focus and physiological standpoint. For the muscles that go down in volume, play with pushing sets on average a bit closer to failure. For muscles being pushed to higher volumes, choose exercises that are less fatiguing and don't go too crazy with failure, especially for early sets for a given exercise. Something cool that can happen with this experimentation is you might just find you prefer to train some muscles more intensely while other muscles with a bit more volume. I don't think we have any evidence that can meaningfully tell us about individual responses, and there isn't currently some metric that's very good at guiding us. But with that being said, it's hard to ignore personal experience. for one reason or another, it does seem that some people do respond to different volumes. Stop screaming on the internet about you or your client's experiences as if it applies to everyone. We believe you. Keep doing your thing if something is working for you. As always, if you like the video, like the video. If you have any comments or feedback, leave them down below. And, of course, subscribe. Share with friends and family, but not the ones that hate you. Peace!